everybody. I'm here to talk to you today about pilgrimage in the Middle Ages, which is a really cool topic. IMHO. Of course, first thing you should know is that medieval maps were often made oriented with east to the top. And that was because, so normally we put north at the top of a map, but for people in the Middle Ages, east was to the Holy Land. So that was the top of the map. Tells us a little bit about what people in Europe considered to be extremely important in the Middle Ages. So where would people go on pilgrimages? Well, journeying to the Holy Land was, of course, a huge desire of many people, but it wasn't the only place you could go. But I'll start with the Holy Land, what today we think of as like Israel and Palestine. This is the area where Jesus and the apostles lived when they were on earth. And in the 4th century, during the time of the Roman Empire, it was pretty easy to get there because Rome controlled all of those territories. Rome controlled the Mediterranean, so journey there wasn't impossible. And the earliest travelers, as far as we can tell, usually went because they want to have some kind of individual spiritual experience by going to locations described in the Bible as a means to enhance their faith. So that certainly happened before the Middle Ages. But many of the places where people would go to visit were eventually turned into churches and shrines. I don't even know if this... It's worth noting that many of the places where people went, both before the Middle Ages and during the Middle Ages, had in fact been turned into churches and shrines about 300 years after the death of Jesus. For example, the Roman Emperor Constantine built a basilica where Jesus was crucified and a rotunda above the Holy Sepulchre where Jesus was buried and resurrected. In Bethlehem, he also built a church over the cave, supposedly where Jesus was born. Of course, it's not the buildings per se that is important to the pilgrims so much as what happened in those places. So people definitely went to visit the Holy Land, and importantly, the Holy Sepulchre was a key pilgrimage site. But people also went to Rome and major sites in Europe, and they were easier to get to if you're living in Europe to get to Europe than it is to, say, go to the Holy Land. Rome had been home to the saints Peter and Paul, for example, among others. There were also many holy relics kept in Rome, but also at other major important churches around Europe. So in particular, during the 11th and 12th centuries, pilgrims went to Santiago de Compostela. People still go today. They walk those routes. That is where the relics of St. James the Greater were believed to have been discovered in 830. English pilgrims were very fond of going to Canterbury, where the severed head of Thomas Becket was a relic. He had been martyred by King Henry II in 1170 and turned into a saint not long after. Of course, there were plenty of local shrines people went to. Journeys could be short or long, local or international. If you couldn't even go on a pilgrimage, something you might do is often your churches, like at Chartres, there's a labyrinth, and you could just walk the labyrinth. It's a series of concentric circles made into a kind of maze where you walk through, and it's sort of like taking a kind of pilgrimage. But just to give you a stats on how popular it was to go on pilgrimage, I'll just tell you some that we know for the UK. So one shrine, Walsingham in Norfolk, which is a healing shrine, and this was visited by pilgrims who were themselves sick or had sick loved ones. And the shrine supposedly contained a relic that had Virgin Mary's breast milk, I guess. In the year 1534, based on the amount of money in gifts that was collected, which is £260, so the UK, that meant about 62,000 people came each year, about 1,200 people a week. Etheldreda Shrine in Ely. I can't pronounce her name. That one had 21 visitors a day. St. Edmund Shrine in Bury had about close to 30,000 people per year, and Canterbury, which was really a big one, especially between 1198 and 1207. The income offerings suggest there were crowds of 100,000 people per year. And actually, there was a year in which they dedicated a new corona at the east end of the cathedral to house Becket's severed head, and there were 180,000 visitors that came that particular year. So why did people go to these shrines? Well, they went to visit relics and important locations related to saints, and they had a wide variety of reasons for wanting to go. There was a desire to go to sacrifice, not animals, but, the time and energy to go on this pilgrimage, to participate in the rituals, to see what there is to see at these places. Very common reasons include fulfilling a vow, for example, seeking a miraculous cure, expiation from a crime, and of course deepening faith also was very important. Seeing or touching or being near a holy object or place conferred some of its power on the viewer. There are other reasons too. Some people went to make pilgrimage because their bishop said you have to make penance for sins. For some people, it was an excuse to travel, to get out of everyday life. It was one of the few legitimate reasons people had to leave their work and leave their responsibilities. And some people even went, particularly women, to escape difficult home lives. We know of women who made pilgrimages and to kind of escape their husbands, sometimes on recommendation from their local parish priest. And when they returned, they said, "Oh, I was told to join a convent," so it got them out of their marriages. But there's a few other reasons that I want to focus in on just a little bit more, and that is the indulgence and healing in particular. So let me pause that there.